Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. The last time I was here, I introduced someone else, and I think it's a little bit more fun to talk myself. And I have a great topic to talk about today. As you know, it's this pyramid and the Sphinx of Egypt, the most durable of the seven wonders of the ancient world. Now, I say ancient world because I'm working from a different list. As we go on tonight, you'll understand a little bit more about it and why I've said that. The compilation of the seven wonders of the ancient world is not a modern invention, however. I didn't come up with it. It's not like David Letterman's 10 best list on The Late Show either. The idea derives from groupings that were assembled much earlier in history. And here are what are usually referred to as the seven wonders of the ancient world. Now, the first wonders list is usually attributed to Antipater of Sidon in the first half of the 2nd century. And then even earlier, in the 5th century, the famous Herodotus, who wrote a lot about Egypt, composed one. Callimachus also, and he was the chief librarian of Alexandria in the 3rd century, also composed one. And then Philo of Byzantium is another person who also composed a list. And this is pretty much what you have. So, the first on the list is the Great Pyramid of Giza. Next to the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, the Lighthouse of Alexandria. One of our lectures in this series will be on that too. The Mausoleum of Halicarnassus, the statue of Zeus at Olympia, the Colossus of Rhodes. Note that Egypt had 2 entries, both on the architecture list. There are usually 5 on the architecture list and 2 on statuary. Now, although changes occurred over the years, some variation of the phrase Egyptian pyramid remained one of the few permanent fixtures throughout all of the ages. The Great Pyramid is the phrase that appears most frequently without the name of its pharaoh or its builder, and in Egyptian that's Khufu, in Greek it's Cheops. There we go. The other term that's used is the pyramid at Giza, the Great Pyramid at Giza. And I think that may have been to deal with the specificity of the site that they were talking about, and very likely. Then the third term was the pyramids of Egypt. And this may have also been to try to clarify the situation, because in fact Egypt had over 140 pyramids. Now, in none of these lists, however, do they have the Sphinx. And I think the Sphinx is a very important addition, because it is a very important part of the complex at Giza, and I think that it should be added. And you can see from these examples that I've just shown you how important a part of the complex it really is. I also put it on my lecture title because we have a great Sphinx, and I'm sure you all, most of you, if not all of you, have seen it in Lower Egyptian Gallery, and it has just celebrated its 100th year here in Philadelphia. And we can proudly say that it is the largest Sphinx in the Western Hemisphere, or at least that's what we were saying this whole year until I realized I now have to qualify it and call it the largest real Sphinx in the Western Hemisphere, because this is even larger. So, one of the things that I wanted to talk about was answering some of the questions as to why the Giza pyramids maintained the top position on the list of great wonders all these years. Well, one of the things is that it is the oldest of them. It's also the only one that has survived all these years. And it is in a marvelous state of preservation. The other thing is that it has had continuous use of the site for thousands of years. Priests and religious functions still function there almost 2,000 years later or after it was built. It was a very popular tourist site, certainly during the Greek period and even earlier. And as you can see from here, these are Greek graffiti at the southern temple of Ramses II at Abu Simbel. Now, I also put together a whole bunch of facts, because if I don't do that now, I'm sure that I'm going to be asked afterwards, and then I always forget these numbers, so I figured I would get them all together, and then we can go over them if you want later. The word pyramid may not actually be an ancient Egyptian word. Most dictionaries tell you that it's derived from the Greek word pyramis, a type of wheat cake. I'm not sure how this actually goes into pyramid, but one of the articles I read said that some of these Greek cakes took a triangular shape, so maybe the Greeks were using this satirically. Don't know for sure. The only Egyptian possibility is an uncommon phrase pronounced piri em us, and it means the height of a pyramid over 2,000 years after the pyramids were built. So I'm not sure that that's of any help. One of the suggestions as to why its shape came into being is that it may symbolize the rays of the sun by which Pharaoh ascends to the sky. Now, the largest of the pyramids is that of Khufu, who is the second pharaoh of the 4th dynasty. And he ruled about 25 years, somewhere in that time period, possibly as much as 30. There's a hair trigger on this pointer. All right, so you have Khufu on the left and his pyramid on the right. This is the only known three-dimensional figure of the great King Khufu. What's interesting is it's about this big, and his pyramid is almost 500 feet high. So it's sort of ironic that the creator of the world's greatest pyramid has one of the smallest statues that we know about. Now, as I said, almost 500. Technically today, it's 481 feet high. But Herodotus, the 5th century Greek historian, when he described it, he said that it, or at least he claimed that it had actually reached 800 feet high. This is an extreme exaggeration, and it's one of the indications that it's likely that Herodotus, number one, was not actually saying these things on his own. He was taking second, third, fourth, or even fifth-hand information, and very possibly never even went to Egypt at all. How about the amount of blocks? There are plus or minus 2.3 million local stone blocks, most of which were limestone for the core, and they range in weight, but with an average weight of about 2.5 tons. A final layer consisting of smooth, very fine limestone, called Tura limestone from further away, has not survived. Nor have several lower courses of granite, which also came from several hundred miles south, and also the capstone. But recent restorers have come to suggest that this is probably what it must have looked like. It's pretty incredible. Now, here's another fact. All of this was probably built, I know this is not a great slide, but there are so many different possibilities. But Mark Lehner, who is the real expert in this and even has a NOVA show on it, has come up with all these designs for all the different possible ramps that were constructed. And he feels that it was basically an exterior ramp system. But just as I was putting the finishing touches on this, I read that somebody else has now suggested that there were interior ramps. And I haven't figured out how that could possibly happen. Well, maybe this is the way it happened. You can see one of the things that we Egyptologists have to deal with all the time is, well, how did they build the pyramids? And of course, the obvious answer is by aliens. And one of the things that I am shown often is this obvious hieroglyph of some kind of alien starship. Now, it isn't actually, I don't want to make too much fun of this, but what the reality is, and we actually have it in our own collection too, is that the Egyptians very often recarved inscriptions, and that's what happened here. And just as in the case with our Ramesside statue upstairs, where there was a correction in it that was made, and then the offending parts were just simply plastered over, and in time the plaster has fallen out. And that's exactly what you see here. Now, a couple of other facts. The estimated size of the workforce on the project and the amount of time to completion. Now, this has varied among different authors and also over time. The one thing is that the amount of time it took ranges for between 20 and 30 years, and that actually has to be correct because we know that Khufu reigned about 25 years. So that's not a mistake. Herodotus and Diodorus decided that there were 3 monthly shifts with 100,000 slaves in each one, and it took 10 years to build the track to get the stones there, which was then used for the causeway, and then 20 years to build the pyramid itself, which is a total of 30 years. So that's in the 5th century BC. Emery and Petrie in the late 19th, early 20th century decided that there were also 4,000 skilled permanent workers plus 100,000 seasonal workers, and they were set up in gangs, and that it took at least 20 years.